Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's past 5. Welcome to the last overview scrutiny meeting session. Apologies from we've got kind of a different composition of the committee yet again. I think most new apologies actually come to this. So, are there any minutes of the last meeting on the 23rd of January? Is it typical that I sign them? Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? I have no announcements. No announcements from anywhere else. Right, so moving on to the first item on the agenda, the council's finance performance.
So this is the finance report. Also noted Brian Elliott is here, and let's and before we focus on that, notice in the pack there has been a decline essentially is measured by in the red last time. Were red to moving in the right direction, so it's less red. But place. Yeah, well, it's still in. Two other ones that are red, we've got flight string. So the number of flights incidents high. Again, that dropped slightly in December. Still in red there. And also, fourth one here, arrears collection of business rates. You company transition to that delays also the service thought away from recovery to the areas including the end. Actually, similarly, the arrears collection of council sector also now moving into it. In addition, the other revenues and metrics one I want to draw attention to is quality assurance error. That's increased the rate as well. So the 2021-22 housing bank audit is being finalised at the moment. And you'd expect when the external auditor is looking at cases, estimate they have to do some errors, and then we are extrapolating those errors. Now, good results in us crossing the lower threshold using some. So, although the stats in the report say value is 0.26, and this target 0.4, that's actually correct to say that on 9 that was 0.26 in there. The extrapolation of the error could be found in the audits will take but fourth, the The last two red other indicators are CD 21, community treats. And well, quick explanation here of what exactly does that mean? So it does say it's a multi-agency review of case involvement. It's specific antisocial behaviour, but it's in a residential setting, so this has nothing to do with in the location of residencies. And actually, the increase in triggers is necessarily negative. So what we find is more that can be done for the resident, so we preserve antisocial behaviour. It's the output from that actually by getting the police involved, by getting registered providers involved, by getting us involved with support services to do, the resident ends up with the situation. But we have 5. And then the last one, the last red is just bins over 17. We have triggered target there as well, 247 period, 210. And that equates to 26 collections per 100 collections. So 26 missed in per 100. And over Christmas, we did have some issues with our software not working properly. Upgrade and upload. And we probably logged more cases here as missed bins rather than anything else. So it's slightly wrong. Or that we never report it correctly in terms of something that might not. We've also had a couple of crew changes as well, and catch-up rounds where they don't normally collect from that particular round, meaning that they are more likely to miss a bin in that situation. And the numbers of going forward have started to come down again. And I just conclude by saying that actually 26 missed bins per 100,000 is still very, very good, I think, and perhaps not quite worthy of a red indicator. But we are where we are. So are there any other questions at all? Not had any questions in advance, but are there any questions on the performance side before I move on to revenue and before we move on to capital? No, I'll carry on. So in terms of revenue, at month 10, we're forecasting an overspend of £0.2 million, which I think is reasonable overall in the context of high inflation and the unexpected high salary increases. Obviously, we've had the unbudgeted rapid increase in the interest rates, sort of netting that down a bit. And of course, there are still a couple of months there to improve. And I've asked the services to check carefully that there isn't any budget there that they haven't spent that they're hoping to carry forward, and we'll make sure that the outturn will capture everything. It's just worth saying on salaries in terms of looking forward and looking ahead to 23-24, that the initial national pay offer has been put forward for the salaries for the forthcoming year. And on the table is a further £1,925 or 3.88% for officers if it's the greater of that, and 3.5% for chief officers. And when we've crunched those numbers, it's likely to put us £300,000 over budget for 23-24 before the year actually starts. And of course, this is just the initial pay offer, and the unions are voting on whether to take industrial action. So there's further salary pressure there on next year's budget. In terms of the debt, legal and development are working through their detailed action plan to bring in the debtors there on the SIL and the Section 106, and they are lining up payment plans for some, legal action for others, and we'll be closely monitoring and working through that, and we'll bring you an update next time. Any questions on the revenue side, or should we move on to capital? No, move on. So I think we've discussed, not just at the last meeting, but at several meetings, the performance of the capital programme.
And I think we've all been unhappy with the way that we currently measure it against the spend. And month 11 is no different. So 4.2 million spent of 12.1 million. That's around 35% of it. And it's a similar expenditure to the expenditure that we did in 21-22. So as part of the papers that I've presented to you, I've done some fairly rudimentary analysis of some of the causes on a very simplified basis, of course, whether they are internal, whether they are external, how much control we have over those. And some of the works, you'll notice, have actually been completed and we're just waiting for the invoice, which is a good position to be in, I always think. And we'll accrue that figure in our actual outturn if we haven't received the invoice by the end of the year. And some of the time, actually, it's not a bad thing not spending the money, because financially, at least, obviously there are other reasons why you would do a project. By not spending it, many of the capital projects actually don't have a financial return. So we've got a mixture here of capacity issues, of budget setting issues, of profiling and timing, the general optimism, and we've also got complexity. And that's why Brian is here with us now, because obviously he is a key part of the capital programme. And it's not simple to sit in a room like this and just think, yeah, well, that project should just be done because it's nice and easy. Brian will explain why it's not easy to do these things and all the complexities that go with each of the projects with some real live examples. So perhaps I should hand over to Brian and then we can have a chat, further discussion afterwards.
Thanks. First project. Get easy. That would be easy. I'm plugged in. There you go. My life. So I'm going to give a little overview of the process, as Dom said, to try and help understanding the sort of complexities we face day to day. So background, projects are large and small. Small doesn't always mean easy. We've got projects like the work at the Horsham Fountain, which is only £150,000, a relatively small project for us, but massive technical complexity to get that delivered. Projects have multiple phases and complexities with each phase, and I'll go through those. And this presentation, I'm really talking about the really big projects because it's just easier to sort of grasp the overall challenges that we have on these. So first of all, I wanted to just say this, that we do get stuff done. Okay, so these are projects that have been delivered, major projects that have been delivered since 2016, and the completed ones are in excess of £30 million. They're projects that you will all remember. Many of you will remember all of them. Some of you remember some of them. So these are major projects by anybody's standard. And we have a pipeline of projects coming through, major projects that you know about: Highwood Community Centre, Duke Square and London Road, 2 affordable housing projects. And we have an extended pipeline, which are at business case stage, which is the capital decarbonisation work. Some of those amounts of money are very small, but the projects are incredibly complicated. To find a simple technical solution to decarbonising a house is not easy. And every house is different. So every house has its own unique set of problems. And then there's Hurst Road, again, which you know about. And these are the ones above 300,000. There's a whole host of projects that are below that level. So our approval process, so best governance practice is to allocate the budget before the money is spent, and that's what we do. And projects come to council for allocation in two ways. It's either at the year-end budget approval process, which generally tends to be the smaller projects, or a budget bid with a cabinet council paper, which is the larger projects. So there may be 3 or 4 papers a year on the larger side, and lots of little projects that are approved at the beginning of the year. The project, this is really important, the project approval is at concept stage. So the principle is promoted with early stage information. So we're not always aware of the absolute technical details in the project, these technical challenges, and the budget is put together with limited information. So it's a best guess, a good estimate, but the reality is that figure hardens as time goes on. And when the project is approved, the project plan starts. So I've got, not the slide I was expecting. So cabinet, so this broadly says what I just said, actually, high level. So cabinet information generally covers the business case, early stage cost estimate, which is what I said, high level view of project risks, very high level, estimates of budget and approximate program at this stage. And the large projects have an extensive business case. So often there's a lot of work put in with members to define the project, to get stakeholder approval, to generally get the principle of the project over the line. So it's the principle that's being approved with a budget allocation, but the project actually hasn't started in terms of delivery of the project. So these 2 slides illustrate that. This is the just the 5 phases of the project. You go on the internet, phases of a project. This is the slide you get, and this is just to show where the cabinet council approval is. It's at the early stage, at the concept and initiation stage, and this is the RIBA equivalent for a construction project. And again, cabinet council approval at very early stage. There's lots of process that happens after that cabinet approval has been given. So this slide deals with the issues that we deal with in delivering a project. And it was I put this together just by thinking, what are the problems we've had? And when I did this slide, I thought, how long does that actually take? And you're talking about a year here, quite easily. Things take a year. So procurement of consultants, defining the scope, getting the procurement methodology, whether it's frameworks or whether it's tender process, that has to be tendered. There has to be an evaluation process, which is a group of officers getting together that go through the tender returns. And then there's a moderation meeting, then there may be a meeting with the consultants. So that process can take a month, 2 months, 3 months, just to procure the consultants. Then you have the technical design process, site surveys, ground conditions, services surveys, biodiversity and arboricultural issues, design risks, building control and planning regulation compliance. Just to get the detail of the site and analysed. Planning issues, we've got local objections to council projects. We tend to find that council projects are looked at more closely. Often small projects go to council that go to the planning committee that would otherwise be dealt with by delegated approval, but because the council is the owner, they have to go to committee. Again, that takes time. And there's a great deal of scrutiny on those projects, rightly. Not complaining about that, but it's not an officer delegated approval. And of course, water neutrality. Then we have legal matters that may be to do with the site, restrictive covenants, new leasing arrangements. Often we have to deal with a project that seems related to external people. So we don't always have control of timing of issues where there are legal issues that relate to a third party. We can't say you have to do this by such and such. Often those negotiations can be very delicate, where we're dealing with people that don't have to give us what we want. So we have to deal with those delicately. And then there's the procurement of the contractor. Again, 2 to 3 months, could be longer if it's an overdue tender process. Cost issues, based all of these contracts, some coming in over budget, then having to go back, value engineer, possibly redesign, possibly restructure the deal that we've got with tenants. And I'll talk you through that scenario later on. Maybe a need to revisit council to get a different budget approved. Re-procurement of the contractor, that I've had to do because of time, the time taken, the procurement team felt that it was inappropriate just to negotiate with that contractor. I needed to re-procure, rightly. And then you start the construction phase and the technical stuff that comes out of that, ground conditions, supply chain issues, weather issues, contract performance, all of these complexities. These are all real life problems that we face. So I was going to talk through 2 examples. One is the Millstream vet surgery, which is a little extension. It's a £300,000 project that was approved years ago down in Storrington. It was, the way this project came about is the tenant approached us and said, I'm interested in, he actually wanted to put a temporary building on the car park in order to expand his vet surgery. I said, oh, no, don't do that. We'll extend the building and rentalize it, and you can have a proper permanent arrangement. So there was a legal deal that needed to be put in place with that third party, with that tenant. We went out to tender, and the contract sum came in at 65% over budget. So that wasn't going to work. So the original deal was that we, the council, were building the extension and fitting the extension with plastered finishes and wiring and lighting and things like that. We renegotiated with the tenant to take out their fitting out work contract, to take out that level of detail, and basically we're delivering them a shell arrangement which they will fit out. So we did that. We then renegotiated with the contractor on the scope to split the contract between the original contract sum and the revised deal structure. And then COVID came along. The tenant pulled back, didn't drop out of the deal, but his enthusiasm for the deal diminished during the COVID period, which I completely understand. His priority was on preservation and running of his business during the COVID challenges. So the deal lost energy. This happens, and when we're dealing with a third party, the deals can lose energy. He came back and said, want to do this now. We had to retender because of the passage of time and the new scope of works, and then document the deal, which was incredibly detailed. It was a surrender and re-grant, restructuring of the arrangements on the car park. There were 7 separate interrelated legal documents to get this over the line, excluding the building contract. And then finally signed it off, get the contractor on site, and then they start digging and found, although we did a site survey, a ground condition survey, these things, you start digging and things can be different. And the ground conditions were poor in one area which meant that we needed to do a major foundation redesign. So that meant that we moved from a traditional foundation to a pad foundation. So that had time and cost implications. Current status is that the project is cracking on. We've got a building that's where they've got the roof trusses in and beginning to close it out. And it will, because of other cost savings that we've managed to save in other areas, it will complete broadly on budget. And it's probably going to be about, even from getting on site, it's probably going to be about 2 months later. So this is it's taken years of work to get this project over the line. It's a discretionary project in a sense. You didn't have to do this. You know, this is a creative project that has been created in order to add value to the portfolio. It's not there isn't community value in this project. It's a creative project. So the next one, this is a project that aborted, but it's a big lump of money in the project plan. It was 2.75, I think. So here we had a similar sort of pressures from a tenant, wanted to expand. We looked at a creative solution to help that expansion, which was to extend this big warehouse units at Oakhurst. So these units are probably 25,000-30,000 square feet. And we agreed a deal to expand the units into the bund at the back. There was sufficient space in order to be able to do that. And we agreed a deal with the tenant, and we agreed a deal with the landowners of that property. Complex development agreement and a purchase with a pre-let to the tenant. There were environmental issues to be sorted out. These take about a year. Okay, and we had this problem on Oakhurst Phase 4. It took about a year to get the environmental sorted out because you have to start at a certain time of year and run through seasons and then do the analysis and then negotiate with Natural England and what have you to deal with the news. And then sometimes you have to find mitigation strategies, which was an issue we had on Oakhurst Phase 4 actually. Again, all eats time, this sort of issue. There were cost changes to the deal, so we repackaged the deal for the tenant. The tenant was supportive, and then COVID. Tenant said, "Well, put projects on hold for a period of time." Tenant actually died. The managing director of the company died. The business was then sold to a US group by his wife. Went to them, can we resurrect this project? Lots of discussions, and they've said, no, it's dead. So that's aborted. So that's 2.75 million, whatever it was, that now will not be spent. So that was it's a big lump as that original budget proposal. The adjoining landowner spent about 60,000 of fees on that, which they lost. We invested a lot of officer time into this, and it hasn't come to anything. So the council approval process today is this very early stage budget approval that I mentioned before we have the detailed analysis. And we've done, Dom working, feeding back to me through these meetings and through a sort of iterative process. We're getting better at profiling the cost between years. But you can see that even when you profile the cost between years, sometimes the sort of challenges that you can have can disrupt that program. I have said to Dom, it might be sensible to do two budgets, one for an enabling budget, 10-15%, approve the principle, get the enabling budget to take it through to deeper into the design development process, and then come back with a full budget with a fixed price and a program. And that's generally the direction of travel that I've gone for the affordable housing projects. Being careful in business cases and cabinets to say we'll be back to firm up the budget bid. And suggest budgets that are shown over a longer period of time. So at the moment, as an officer, I see the money, but there's from my perspective, I know it's not the true from Don's perspective, but from my perspective, I tend to focus on the year, not on the 3 year. So I've presented this as a discussion points. I'm happy to answer any questions. And if you want to talk about specifics of other particular projects, quite happy to talk about those. Where I'm dealing with them and where I know about them. Maybe some of them I don't. Points I wanted to make: delivery of major projects take time. The budget approval process needs to recognise that reality. It's I often think that there's an approval of the political desire. Let's get this project done, and then it's, well, why hasn't it been done yet? Well, because we've just started. So I think that reality, and you'll all have different views on that, but just recognize, just within that, noticing that reality, I think it's important. I didn't want this to be a sort of wow session. I'm not sort of complaining about anything or saying it's really hard. It's not. There's just things happen that need to be managed and are difficult to manage. Not delivering the point that Don made earlier, not delivering projects on time can be beneficial because we're generating return on that money. But there is, of course, particularly in the last year or so, there's the impact of inflation, which has been ridiculous over the last, even during and since COVID. And project delivery has a range of success criteria. I wanted to sort of reinforce that point, really. Meeting end user expectations, value for money, and program, they're all important. And we are juggling. Whenever we do a project, we're juggling meeting the project brief, meeting what's been approved, getting value for money as best we can, as well as the programming issue. And there's an interplay between all those forces. That's it. I'll leave this up just in case anybody wants to revisit any particular slide.
Thank you, Brian. Ian and then Ruth.
I spoke to Jane about this, and one of the things we talked about was perhaps there is a tendency for some people to be unrealistic about how quick something's going to happen, and that can lead to people being annoyed because things haven't happened as quickly as you claimed it would. I think, if I remember rightly, an example was given of the skate park where perhaps it took a lot longer. Would it not be more, is there not a lesson to be learned from this, that I don't think anyone here is going to argue that you're incompetent or that your group are not doing the best you can, but perhaps you're being overly optimistic and need to take a more pragmatic, realistic approach, so that we don't end up having something trailed as 12 months that turns into 2 years, when actually it was always 2 years. And even if you say 2 years and you get it under 24 months, then suddenly, yay, you did it under budget and under time. I just wonder whether that's something that you could learn as a management group.
Absolutely, I think that's spot on. We have the difficulty, don't we, in that we are only approving a capital program for the year ahead. But we're trying to work around that. So for example, in the 23-24 capital programme, we've approved some of these larger projects in its entirety, and we've said we will come back and work out the profiling later when we know a bit more information and we've made progress in terms of some of all the things that Brian's just said there. And that's a perfect example of the skate park. I think we've got a better outcome, a better product, because we've spent more time consulting and getting the right sort of skate park that people want to use. But that took time, which we didn't factor in 2 years ago when we said we'd do it within 12 months. So we've learned lessons there, and actually parks and the countryside are much better now at building in that period of consultation. I would say that those projects tend to be slightly less complex than some of the ones that Brian is talking about here. So each of the different areas within the capital programme will have different difficulties, I suppose. And it's learning those simple lessons and then applying those properly. So we are trying to flex and adapt our approach to the way that we do this, albeit in the constraint that we have to approve the budget up front. And we do it for 1 year at a time, generally.
Ruth?
I think everybody acknowledges that this is a long-standing problem that we've got, and that we're not even unique in this. Clearly, that realism in profiling your project and your spending sounds like a sensible and desirable thing to be doing. I just wanted to probe a bit more whether you'd looked at how other people who are doing this well are doing it, and asking whether there were any things other than this sort of delaying our expectations that you would like to be doing, but you feel constrained that you can't do. Clearly, getting rid of us councillors would probably help speed things up a bit, but I'm not sure that's on the table. But are there any other things apart from purely this sort of pencil exercise of shifting everything rightwards a bit that we should be looking at to improve our performance?
Well, we have a capacity issue. So if we only limited our work to 3 or 4 projects, we are pretty sure we could positively deliver those 3 or 4 projects quite well on time as well. But we have a number of lines across our capital programme. We are doing an awful lot in a lot of different areas. And we have a choice, I suppose, don't we? So we either get in more project managers, get in more capacity to be able to do that. It costs more to do so. Or we scale down what we're asking to do. We've consistently delivered 5 to 6 to 7, maybe 8 million on a good year over the last 5, 6, 7 years. So it's unrealistic, isn't it, to then expect us to be able to deliver a £12.1 million capital programme each year. But it's difficult, isn't it, because there are things that we have to do, and there are things that we would like to do, and everyone would like to do things in their area and their ward as a councillor, absolutely. And it's getting that balance between everyone around the table, making sure that we're doing it in a way that we can actually deliver what we say we're going to at the start, as well as the pencil exercise of profiling it and getting it wrong.
So if I could come back on that, if the difference between us achieving at 8 million a year and 12 million a year is our project management capacity, the cost of a project manager is actually a very small fraction of that £4 million of lost investment.
I don't think we're just talking, half a person or a person. We're talking a number of an industry of a number of people across the council in different areas, because it's not just the project manager who runs this scheme. It's every service generally gets involved, whether it's legal, whether it's HR, whether it's finance or procurement. You'd have to add capacity across the whole organisation to be able to deliver that, not just one project manager looking at a schedule on a piece of paper.
But if we want to deliver the things we say we want to deliver, that issue of whether that is realistic to build in that capacity is a very live issue, and I'm really trying to understand to what extent you've looked at that and whether we're doing well at this or badly at this, whether it is actually an option.
From my side, I'm not convinced it would. There are lots of different types of projects. Okay, so some projects need somebody to kick it along, so to speak, just to manage the project process. Other projects need technical project management. So on the larger construction projects, the technical project management is always someone outside. So we either recruit it could be an architect has the project management role, the technical project management role. So there's the employment of the consultant, and then the consultant will take things on. Or there's a specialist project manager, which may come in at an early stage. So they're managing at the sort of design development stage, all of the different consultants that are around at that stage. Or it comes in at a later stage where they're actually running the technical project on site. So it's not a lot of these projects aren't managed completely internally. There's a technical aspect of it.
Councillor Blackwell.
Imposed nonsense on locking down COVID meant that we've got an extraordinary situation at the moment, which is exacerbated problems you have.
It's very difficult with COVID because although it only finished really in September of last year, people forget now that it even happened. Is my experience. There was a big, we virtually locked down this country for 2 years. It was incredibly difficult to deliver anything during that period. We had projects on site during that period. The Discovery Hub at Warnham during that period, and Oakhurst Phase 4 during that period. But after it's over, it's like now it's all done. You just get on with it and revert to business as usual. But it isn't business as usual.
This is one of the ongoing costs of COVID in the whole of the country. What happened then is having still an effect now.
It's difficult to isolate COVID as the cause, but we're in a world that's different now to what it was pre-COVID. And whether it's COVID or whether it's other factors, people have different views on that. All I know it's difficult. It just working with people can be more complex. There are things that are really easy, like now we will use Teams. So to actually have a Teams meeting with 10 people, brilliant. Everybody saves 2 hours in traveling. It's brilliant. And effective, but there seems to be, I don't know what it is, to get things done is hard. To get deals documented is hard. That's my experience post-COVID.
Anyone else? Sorry. Right.
It's probably a question for Dom, really. Dom, this isn't new, is it, this situation? Because I think we can go back 3 or 4 years and it occurs virtually every year. Brian's put up some questions or suggestions or proper proposals or whatever they were at the end. I'm not quite clear whether you were going to grasp those and then come back with some brilliant ideas or not. And then picking up on Ruth's point, we're not unique. There are, was it 310 other councils, whatever the number is, I always forget. So this can't be something that just totally appears at HDC. So I think the point that she was making is that if this occurs in the other 309, what do they do about it? I understand Brian's response that we either put more resource into it or you basically can't do as much. That's fairly logical, but I just wondered where you stood and what your proposal would be for taking this forward.
So there are 2 points there, aren't there? So I think the other 309 authorities probably live with a delivery of about 70%. And that seems to be the standard. There will be some above that and be some below that. What will I do about it? Well, I think we need to sit down and work out. In some scenarios, we could do this. In other scenarios, we could do that. In the budget setting, we could try this to see if that works. And we have done that to a degree in 23-24 with the way that we've approved a project, and then we'll reprofile later. So I don't think there's one solution that will fit everything. We're almost doing this on a how do we make it better across the different areas for each line of the project and each line of the capital program. So it will be a number of solutions in here. I need to go away and work out exactly what those solutions will look like for each of those individual areas. It will not be a simple wave of magic wand and it'll be done overnight. So that's, setting some expectation. But I think we can do this better. Obviously talking to Brian about some of the difficulties there, we will try things and we will see whether for some of the larger projects, just doing a small, initial exploratory budget works. And we'll give it a go and we'll see whether that, the data comes out from that actually it does or it doesn't. And you will also see whether you like that or not, being unsighted on what it might cost you in the future, having done, £100,000 worth of work. Are you going to be more inclined to say, well, we don't want to just cut that and not do it anymore, but we have to spend X. So there'll be some difficult decisions for everyone, I would say.
So can I come back up then? So are you suggesting a sort of turntable for that, or is it a long, difficult problem? I don't know really. I'm just asking the question where it's going to go. I understand the answer and I understand Brian's proposal. I just think it would be useful to have an idea of what time scale that might happen in or over, so that we don't end up with the same situation, or at least if the situation is prevailing, everyone understands why the situation is prevailing. It stops Brian having to repeat what he said this time next year.
Of course. So at the moment that's floating around in my head rather than in a summary that I can share with you, and I will share that with the committee on this.
I think that's the important thing, isn't it? Is to know that something's going to come back concrete to be discussed further in a different council.
Well, just pick
Right.
just as you were speaking, it seems to me there are two issues. One is the objective to accelerate projects? Are we talking about actually trying to manage our projects differently? Or the alternative is, are we managing the way we report to reduce the annual overspend? There are two different directions of travel there, with two very different solutions.
Councillor Skip.
Thank you very much. I'm sure these are basic questions. When I listened to your report, I wondered how anything got done at all. I can imagine it's quite a depressing sort of situation sometimes. Anyway, leaving that aside, it seemed to me that one of the issues was you've got so many projects on the stocks, in a way. How can you actually sort of devote time with a limited number of staff to producing successful projects that are demanded by all? In other words, do you need more resources, more staff? Do you need to be channeling your projects into a very basic number, which gives more time? Can you actually, within the council itself, where you're talking about a number of departments being involved, is that not something that can be streamlined and resolved? Because meetings can drag on, and then somebody says, well, I don't know the answer to that, or we'll go away and think about it, or we'll produce an answer in another 2 months. Well, it seemed to me it's an ideal situation for not getting things done. Is there a way of speeding up your processes? And is that by actually reducing your projects?
yeah, I think the processes are not perfect. No one's, we're humans. So, yeah, I'm sure I can look at, yeah, it's not something that I don't look at, but there are, yeah, I was talking to a colleague earlier today about the leasing transaction, and it's very easy to lose weeks. Yeah, you ask somebody for something and it can take 2 weeks to come back. Yeah, unless you're on them every 10 minutes, which in real terms doesn't happen. We're dealing with other organizations and lots of people. So things do naturally take time. You know, I don't know whether yeah, it's a really good point about whether, you know, are we slow at delivering projects compared to other organizations? I don't know. The one that comes to mind, the one that I've watched for the last 5 years is the cobblers at Slimfold. I don't know whether anybody here knows that. It's the, yeah, that's the Saxon Wheel development, fully funded, ready to go. They've only just gone on site after 5 years. I don't know what their problems have been, but it's not, oh, we'll clear it out and get on with it. You know, other organizations, the private sector, you know, everybody has pressures and challenges in delivering projects. There's HS2 is a good example. So, but we are human. I get that.
Can I just ask one further question? It appertains to one of your figures up on your project delivery major projects. I seem to remember maybe 5 or 6 years ago, Hurst Road came up in discussions about what we were going to do with that area, and I think you were on that committee and you chaired it actually. I noticed Hurst Road residential is on your major project, but I actually haven't seen anything about Hurst Road and residential. At least it hasn't come through to me on my filters. Is this something that's on the wish list, or is this something that's actually going to be achieved?
The major difference on Hurst Road has always been a site assembly operation. So there are 5 or 6 different owners of land, and it is impossible. It's a strong word to use, but practically impossible to dislodge either the Ministry of Justice or the police. You have to have an enormous commitment and be willing to throw an enormous amount of time, money, and energy at them to dislodge them. So the fundamental difference on that site that's changed the timing of that is the new fire station on the A24, which is due for completion in April this year. So, and there's a 6-month decommissioning period on that fire station, and then the site at county site at Hurst Road will be released and will be surplus. So at that point, there is, yeah, that site is definitely going to unlock. That phase 1 site, which is our ownership and county's ownership, will unlock. There's no question about that, because surplus to county's requirements. Yeah, so that will come forward when there's more information for it to on the basis of the transaction between us and county. There's a desire to cooperate with county in delivery of that a scheme on both sides there. I hope that answers your question.
So we could be waiting another 5 years. Or...
I don't think so. I think I really don't think so. No, that's I didn't say that. I said that the site will be decommissioned in September, and there's a real desire to work with county for the joint delivery on that site. there will be constraints on that without question. The obvious constraint is going to be water neutrality. Unless there's a solution to that, yes, it will take time. So we do need to find a solution to that particular problem. And then there's site investigation, planning, viability, delivery, all of the issues that I touched on earlier. But without question, these things take time.
Ruth, and then I think we'll bring this one to a close. Oh, sorry. Okay, Ruth and Nigel. Then.
Thank you very much for allowing me a second bite at the cherry on this one. Really sort of thinking about what I was saying before in your answer. In the past, this council has delivered some really quite substantial projects, new developments of the town centre and Southwater and so on. It's obviously something that we can and should be able to do. More recently than then, we still had more headcount in terms of the sort of, I believe, and I've not been in the council for long, but my understanding is that we had more technical headcount within the council for these sorts of project roles for dealing with infrastructure. So, for example, John Mayle is a name that springs to mind. I'm really just sort of asking again, as when you go back and think about this, that we do look at whether or not one of the reasons we're struggling to deliver is whether we're at risk of being in the same sort of situation which I feel West Sussex got itself in some years ago, where everything was subcontracted out and the ability to specify what you wanted your consultants to deliver on perhaps got too diluted, and therefore you end up going through a process where you haven't got a grip on what you're trying to do or the ability to keep it under control and to budget in the way you would, because you actually do need some really strong people to actually manage that process. You can't just hand over all your responsibilities to an outside contractor. You have to actually have internal expertise. And I know Nigel's looking at me when having mentioned West Sussex, but maybe we could put aside whether or not this is an actual or just a theoretical example here. I think I'm still querying whether in terms of doing that thing you're saying about being constantly on top of whether we've got something and actually getting our external consultants to be the project manager, whether we actually are putting in the resource in the right place early on to deliver the efficiency of making sure we're getting all our sort of bricks lined up right at the beginning.
It's an interesting problem, isn't it? When I first came here, okay, the very few projects have been delivered when I first came in. When I first took responsibility for the department, there were two departments. There was a valuation estates team and technical services team, and there was the establishment was 21 FTE, 21, and now all of this has been delivered using external consultants with the approach that we take, and I have an FTE of 6. So we're delivering a lot more with less people. So it's a challenge to get that blend right. It's a challenge, and I don't worry about it because it's not. I don't feel it's going to happen. But to recruit people of the right competence and capability is difficult. I have some really good people in my team, and I'm on my knees, great in gratitude that I have them. And some of them took, you know, the last appointment I made, I went out twice to find the person. It took about a year to find that person. So yeah, just finding people who are willing to work in local government from a surveying technical perspective is challenging. You only, it's a small group of people that sort of role appeals to. It's not just surveying, it's also legal. It's common in the professions in local government.
Nigel.
And thank you for the report, Brian. Quite the most detailed report I've seen in our capital programme since I've been in my 8 years at this council. And as you know, I'm always interested in the capital programme. Can I just make a couple of points? First off, I am very pleased with the report. I think that's good. It's good to see and to have your explanation. Excuse me, Chairman, I think I should have declared I'm a West Sussex County Council councillor. County councillor, as Councillor Fletcher mentioned, but also if I look at the list on page 19, there are a number of references to the county council, so I perhaps should have made that. I just wondered whether or not this sort of information could be enhanced by a RAG rating assessment on the various projects. And if it comes back to further committees, which I think, judged by the conversations here, that I think that this committee, perhaps its successors, may also have interest in it. It'd be quite useful as an easy way to judge how we're going. That was one of my suggestions. The other one, I was rather amused by the fact that the difficulties we've had in agreeing with a tenant down at Bingshurst to allow an extra car parking spaces to be built. And I'm pleased to see that, I quote, optimism that tenant lease would be quickly resolved. So that is hope, because I know otherwise we're going to have to wait to 2025. So I do hope your optimism is well placed. But I was amused, and sorry, colleagues, by saying benefit by not spending. Well, the benefit by not spending is we haven't got the car parking spaces. So really, we were there to get the car parking spaces. So perhaps a misnomer there. But anyway, if you could, my suggestion, Chairman, would be the RAG rating should be put to all these projects. It would help us very quickly to understand the situation. Thank you.
Sounds like a good idea. Don, let's set that board.
So I suppose the question would be how we would evaluate the RAG rating, because there are financial factors, there are social factors, there are environmental factors, there are a number of different factors there. Are we just looking at the programming in terms of timing? You know, I have to work out how to do that. And I did try to do that on the version that you've got in front of you in terms of the actual spend. There was color coded for, you know, red isn't very good, you know, amber's okay, and green is, you know, we spent it. So we can do it simplistically like that, but obviously that might not be the only way of RAG rating it. So any suggestion, gratefully received.
I'd suggest that actually it's done on an overall figure and you take those all into account. Otherwise, you'll have 25 different RAG ratings. You know, we'll be cutting down forests to put it together. Thank you.
Excuse me, I found my place there. So this is an update, I suppose, on the local authority housing fund. If you recall, in January and February, Cabinet and then Council approved or agreed rather in principle to us taking on the scheme. Just as a quick reminder, it's about receiving £2.6 million in government grant fund and adding £3.2 million of our own money to buy 14 standard sized homes and 2 larger sized homes. And what we didn't know exactly at the time was exactly how we would deliver that. So the paper that's going to Cabinet on Thursday tells us a little bit about how that will be delivered. And it explains that the council will buy the houses and then lease them to the housing company. And that seems to be the most appropriate way of doing things based on all the tax and legal advice that we've received and the guidelines that have now been released. So the report then recommends 2 things. That the 16 properties will be bought in consultation with the Cabinet member for housing, and that saves us having to go back to a Cabinet meeting for each individual property, which would obviously add time to that process. And therefore, hopefully we'll be more efficient and effective, especially if we're putting offers in on the market. We need to be able to do that pretty much straight away rather than wait for a Cabinet meeting. And secondly, we need to also amend the shareholders agreement to insert the lease element into that so that we can actually do that between the council and the company, because when the company was set up, we didn't include that specifically in the shareholders agreement. The report is available to read in the Cabinet papers, but I'm happy to take any questions now.
Any questions? Councillor John.
Sorry, Chairman, would it not have been advisable to have had a link to the Cabinet report to these papers rather than to receive a verbal update? What did you seek that, Chairman?
Yes, I did see it. I agree. Sometimes we do seem to miss these fairly obvious links that would just make our life a bit easier in navigating around. I did have an exchange with the Director of Resources about the rental element to this, because it's going to be slightly different to the rest of the housing company business, in that we're buying these houses just to let out rather than there being a financial incentive to do this. And I wanted to be sure that we were going to have the correct mechanism for collecting the rent. Clearly the housing company are going to need some sort of management fee for collecting the rent, but presumably the rest of any rent that's collected will come back straight back to the council. All right, right.
Well, we are lucky that we have the one of the housing directors here, the housing company directors, I should say. But it is a lease and a rental, isn't it?
Yes, it is. We are working. The way that the company works at the moment is the council collects the rent on behalf of the company, and then pays it to the company. The council will do all the collections for a charge, and then we'll work out the recharges back and forth between the two.
Councillor John.
Chairman, when you report for the overview and scrutiny committee at the Cabinet on Thursday, will you be referring to our thoughts on this particular subject? What are they?
Sure. Come to the final report of the Task and Finish Group on the use of consultants. I should apologise. I should have said that we've got a number of councillors here who were on that task and finish group. But because of the restructuring of this committee, they're no longer on the committee, but it seemed foolish to put them back at the back of the hall. So I thought it would be easier to have them there. So call on Councillor Skip to introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it's good. I was a little bereft at one stage when two of the four of us were translated to positions of higher authority. So thank you very much for coming and joining me. John Milne, of course, can't be here because he's got COVID, or his family have. We took this on because there was concern about the use of consultants within the council, having looked at some of the figures that were coming through to us concerning the use of outside consultants. And so we, as a result of the agreement at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, had our first task and finish group meeting in December last year. There were four of us on that task and finish group, Councillor Circus, myself, Councillor Clark and Councillor Milne. And we looked at how we could take on this task without it becoming a very long and perhaps tedious group. So we looked at, if you look at your report, the executive summary, you will see that we did take note of the council's procedure rules for procurement, which included the recruitment of consultants. And obviously, we thought that these were transparent, fair and consistent, and they're publicly available for those who wish to have a look at them on the website. We noted also that Crawley Borough Council hosts the shared procurement service that provides advice on all aspects of procurement and contract management. And we are one of its partner councils along with Mid Sussex and Mole Valley. So we decided that we would have a set of objectives, and you'll see those objectives in the background on 1.3, the terms of reference, to understand the extent and cost of the use of external consultants in all aspects of the council's policy formulation. We were very fortunate that the finance director was able to furnish us with figures which indicated where monies were being spent on consultants. And we decided that we would look at economic development, because there was spend there, strategic planning and development. And further to that, we would ask for the senior managers to come and talk to us about the use of consultants within their particular teams. And we had three quite detailed discussions with the economic development team, the development management and the strategic planning. And you'll see the minutes have been published, or the notes were published, but we've given a brief resume in 3.1 discussion with the officers. We were quite impressed with what is going on and the actual conduct of their departments in using managers, using consultants. And there seem to be two reasons for using a consultant. One is for technical advice, and for advice which is not available easily within the council, or not at all within the council. And the second was that we did note that some of the teams require more expertise, and they are obviously working to developing some of the officers and encouraging them to progress in their work within the council. So we have in-house specialist staff, for instance, for landscape drainage and conservation, but we don't have archaeology and ecology consultants. That's just one example. And we looked at this, and this was acknowledged by the manager and recognized that maybe there's going to be some sharing with either other councils or within the departments concerning this. We looked at the value for money. This is determined through the procurement process, and any bids, any goods, works or services that fall under 50k threshold can be managed by individual departments. And we were satisfied that those departments took this very seriously and looked at the consultants that were used, looked at the services, looked at their outcomes, and if they were unhappy, if there was any concern, then these departments actually do take steps to not employ those consultants again, or indeed to look again at some of the work they've done at a later time. But we did think that there was value for money, and we thought that generally that monitoring was very satisfactory for those figures. There are regular meetings with heads of service from other West Sussex County Council local authorities, and some pooling of knowledge and joint working. So there are training programs as well between authorities as well as those within this council. The conclusions that you will see, and I will go to those conclusions as a result of our discussions, are in your document, in your executive summary. And I'll just go through them if I may. It's recommended the Overview and Scrutiny Committee note the findings of the review and to ask the Chief Executive that if appointing a consultant following a motion to full council or a decision of a statutory committee, to instruct the head of service to discuss the content of the brief with relevant members to ensure the brief fully captures the intention of decision or request. This was a concern that one of our members particularly had, that if a member, one of the councillors, was asking for a consultant, either through a full motion to council or at a statutory committee, that once that was done, that the councillor may not have any input into the contract for a consultant. And so therefore it was felt that it would be right, not for the relevant member to impose their own particular brand of what they wanted in the contract, but actually to ensure that what they were concerned about was covered. And I think this was a sensible solution, comment, and agreed with actually the chief executive that this was something that could be achieved very easily. We also felt that the heads of service were actually undertaking good practice in seeking opportunities for their joint recruitment of specialists with other authorities, joint recruitment between HDC services that cover similar technical areas, introducing further professional training in key skill areas where the council currently appoints consultants. And this is something that we did note at times. And following recommendations 2 and 4, asked the heads of service to report to a future meeting of Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I see it says within 2 years of the date of this meeting. The reason being that, of course, 2 years will be into the life of another council. 6 months seems a rather short time. So I'm sure we could work on that. But I think that we felt that the use of consultants, in fact, was very sensible. And we felt that it was right to encourage the heads of service in their view of both sharing with other councils and other departments, and also developing the skills of officers that we have, which we could use within this council. So I'm not going to say any more, because I'm sure my fellow councillors are probably going to say a few words as well, and there may be questions. But it was an encouraging, we felt an encouraging undertaking, and it was beneficial for us as well.
Thank you for that, and congratulations on the task and finish group for getting through the work so quickly. It's impressive that we managed to get it through before the end of the year. Are there any other points anyone wishes to make? Councillor Circus.
One of the things that leaves me slightly unhappy about this is that we've lost a certain amount of expertise within the council, as we know, in certain areas in particular, because of a cull of staff at various points. It seems to me, therefore, that puts pressure on us to explore the opportunities for joint working, but for sharing services, to increase the amount of sharing of services with other local authorities, so that there may be, in sharing services, expertise that would prevent the need for making a formal referral to a private external consultant. It seems to me that coming down the track at some stage, possibly as a result of this levelling up agenda, because that's where it surfaced before, is the issue of unitary authorities. And if we're going to have an answer, if we're going to successfully maintain the structure that we've got at the moment, we're going to have to show that we've got perhaps a little bit more enthusiasm for sharing services and sharing expertise with other authorities. And one of the things you'll notice from the report, which reflects what the officers told us, is that there seem to me, okay, they are in some cases valid points, but there did seem to me, I don't know whether I'm being unfair, a certain amount of resistance on the part of officers to joint working with other local authorities. And you'll see through the report, there are all sorts of arguments or advances as to why what sharing services and sharing expertise is not a good idea. It comes up several points in the report. And I think I'd like to see, to be honest, a more positive approach to sharing services, because of the expertise that other local authorities have. And I found myself over the years on so many occasions, we've been discussing issues as if we are inventing the wheel for the first time. And I make the comment, well, other local authorities have got exactly the same issue. Are we talking to other local authorities? Are we dovetailing into their expertise? And I just got the feeling, maybe I'm being unfair, but there was a certain resistance to dovetailing into the expertise of other local authorities. And I think if we're talking about expertise and having the necessary expertise to face the challenges that we do, I would have hoped certainly from the officers that gave evidence to us, that's a slightly more positive approach to sharing services and sharing expertise with other local authorities. I hope I haven't, what's the word, blotted my copybook, Chairman.
Thank you for those words, Councillor Circus. Anyone else have any comments to make? Councillor.
Yes, thank you for the report. Forgive me, I'm not a barrister like Councillor Circus, but I did note the point in paragraph 4 of the executive summary that you only agreed in general. You didn't agree wholeheartedly, which I found an interesting comment. Could I just ask a couple of questions? First off, on one of the recommendations, number 1, of appointing a consultant following a motion to full council or a decision of a statutory committee to instruct the heads of service to discuss the content of the brief with relevant members or members to ensure the brief captures the full intention of the decision. Who are the relevant members?
I think you're talking about the members or the member who raised the particular issue at council or a statutory committee. I think that you're probably unlikely to have one particular member who is actually raising this and demanding that it occurs. You will always need another one to support them. So I think you're probably going to have 2 at any time if there's a problem. Would that be right? Is that what you're?
I'm not quite sure that, we're looking at a motion now. Remember the motion of full council, which is quite a heavy thing. It's not voted on by just one person. It's voted on by, shall we say, the majority. Forgive me, I would have thought the relevant member was actually the cabinet member, because he or she is responsible for putting that into action. To consult with just the odd member, forgive me, we don't have many of those, but we do. We've got 30, 40 members. I just wondered whether that was right. I leave that with you, or I leave that with the committee.
I take your point, except that of course cabinet member and all the other than the council members, there may be a cabinet member who is going to pick it up, but there will be other members who raise the issue. So I mean, you may have a room full of people who are really determined to sit in on this.
Yeah, I think we had that particular issue with the off-street parking task and finish, where that was a report that went to full council and was accepted by full council. Councillor Donnelly in particular had some particular concerns about how consultants should be briefed, and I know he was very frustrated that the consultants weren't appointed as quickly as he would have liked, and B, he was never consulted on that. And I think that is an example where head of service could well have asked him, possibly me as chair of scrutiny, what in particular we wanted that consultant to do.
My only concern is that one particular member may be given or adopts authority for something which really should be left to the officers to determine the brief given to the consultants based upon the decisions made by council.
Yeah, I do take your point. I think at the end of the day, the officers will listen, but then act independently, and that's probably what we hope of our officers. Sure.
I really just wanted to add that while obviously the cabinet member has executive authority for their areas, so it would seem perfectly reasonable for them to be consulted. In the case of where something's raised first at council in a motion, typically the member or members that have prepared that motion are the ones who've gone into significant detail in it. And I think it would be very wrong to be excluding them from this. An example would be the recent motion for social housing, where it turned out that the there wasn't that consultation. And the brief that was given to the consultants did not fully reflect the wording and the meaning behind the motion. So I think we could, if we'd had this in place, we could have done a better job then than we did. And we'd have avoided being in the situation where we'd ask slightly the wrong question, hadn't asked enough of the questions in our brief.
Other points? We have a recommendation on page 27 to note the findings of the review and ask the chief executive to do these various 5 points, sorry. I think verbally the chief executive has already agreed to that, but we need to formally send those recommendations through to the chief executive if you're all in agreement. So have a show of hands. Those agreed? Thank you very much. Next item is the overview and scrutiny work programme on page 35 to 36. Well, obviously, this being the last meeting of this particular version of this committee, it's a little bit difficult to project into the future. But we will be receiving a report on the council's finance performance on the 5th of June, those who are still on the committee. And I'm sure we will fill that programme up very quickly in the new term. Any, Councillor Greening?
Thank you. I certainly won't be here on the 5th of June. Did we invite Councillor Knoll to discuss, as the Cabinet Member for Leisure and Culture, around the museum and the leisure centres to this meeting?
That was discussed, yeah. I think it was actually on the email inviting this meeting. Sorry, I haven't got it in front of me, but on the museums, there has been a lot of work going on in the background, looking at the museum, and a strategy report is coming out shortly, and it seemed inappropriate to just have a question on one particular issue, which was the attendance numbers, where it's accepted that the attendance numbers haven't been recorded in a useful fashion in the past. So that report will be coming to council in the near future, and that will also come to scrutiny should the new scrutiny committee wish to have it. And I think the same is true to an extent on Places Leisure, that work's been going on with them on the contract. I think that is dependent on Dom here, but I believe that work is now nearing completion, and the situation there looks a lot better than it was. But of course, the government have just announced that they're going to provide some funding for swimming pools. So hopefully the situation will be better than we anticipate. Anything you want to say on that, Don? No? Okay.
Forgive me, can I come back, please, Chair?
Yes, of course.
It's not for you to answer Councillor Knoll's questions, and you're almost sounding like you're taking on his brief already on leisure and culture, when in fact it's for this committee to scrutinise the decisions that he may or not have made. And it's just, it would have been nice, the last committee meeting we agreed to invite him. It's just disappointing with Sevenoaks last week announced the closure of some of their leisure centres because they've gone into financial difficulty in a similar relationship that we've had, giving the supplier money, and yet we can't question the cabinet member over this. it's just disappointing. It's not fair on you that we scrutinise you secondhand on hearsay, on stuff going on in the background that we would like to question him about.
I take your point, but I think certainly on the museum, I think it would have been the wrong atmosphere to launch a major strategy document on the museum, to have had a very negative review of one small part of their activities at this committee immediately prior to that. And that was my thinking on that one. Congratulations on becoming the independent member for this committee. Anything else on the work programme? Cabinet forward plan. Again, it'd been good to have been able to get to from one thing to another, but never mind. Does anyone have any points on the cabinet plan? I note that there is a draft climate action strategy report that is going to Cabinet on Thursday. And it seems to me one of the things that this committee should be scrutinising in the future. If we've got a strategy on climate change, obviously the Cabinet will be owning that, but we as a scrutiny committee, I think would be interested in how that is progressing. And having read the draft strategy, it seems to be lacking in any deliverables and any timescales, which I find very disappointing. I mean, it's very difficult to judge how a strategy is going if it's not actually there delivering things. And I will make that point at Cabinet on Thursday. If anyone has any points on that or anything else on Cabinet. I assume that the local listed buildings adoption is pretty uncontroversial. Sorry, Councillor John.
Chairman, thank you for letting us know your views. Should you not take a discussion on what this committee's views are before you take it on yourself to report your views on the situation?
Absolutely right. Well, I would like to hear your views on it if you have them. Councillor Crocus here as a guest, but I'd like to speak.
If I may, Chair, yes, just briefly. Unless I'm missing something, the actual report going to Cabinet is a discussion of the strategy. It isn't actually the strategy document itself. And my understanding was that there are actually two documents have been produced by consultants, a summary and the main strategy document. Just wondering whether these will be available before Cabinet, and whether anybody knows as a matter of scrutiny. Thank you.
I don't know, but I did find a 20-page report, which I assume is the summary report on the council website, and I think that has been signposted to us through press releases and the like. It's got some pretty pictures and it's got a lot of words in it, but it doesn't really seem to have any action. So that was my concern. But I don't know about a more detailed report, and I don't know what the council's plan is to involve non-cabinet members in this report. I would hope there is a plan, but I haven't heard.
Sorry, Chairman, forgive me. I have not read this report to Cabinet, and I don't think it was referred to. There was no link to it in our on our papers for this evening. So if you were to seek your committee's support for what your suggestion, I'd have to abstain because I don't know the ins and outs of it. And it may be that other colleagues here haven't read it either. I don't know whether you've read it. You read everything now, but and even an ex-leader shaking his head over there. I just wonder, forgive me, Chair, I'm not quite sure that this committee is ready to endorse your comments, and you're probably the only one of this group here who's actually read it all the way through. So it should be left to another date, shouldn't it not?
I think you're right, Councillor. I will talk to people maybe at the cabinet meeting, but not during the cabinet meeting, but I will make my concerns known privately at that point, and hopefully there will be a launch of this strategy, and we will all get an opportunity to discuss it in more detail. So thank you for correcting me on that. Sorry.
Well, Chairman, you do have the ability as a councillor simply to ask a question. If that's what I think you're doing. So there's no reason why you have to, you obviously have a dual role, don't you? That as a councillor and one as chairman of this committee. I think what you're doing is, I agree with Councillor Jupp in that you've got to be very careful when you do it. But I think if you have a question, you can simply put the question to the cabinet member, i.e. what's the time scale or what's the motivation? I'm sure if you don't, others will.
Yeah, thank you. So there's nothing further on the cabinet forward plan. We don't have any urgent business, I believe. So I declare the meeting closed at 7:12. Thank you for your attendance and participation.